Daniel had built something most people only dreamed of. From a single storefront with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign, he'd grown a business that now spanned multiple states. Offices, service centers, customer support hubs, each one bearing his company's name like a badge of honor. But lately, something felt wrong. Not in the numbers, they still looked strong, but in the air, in the silence between calls, in the way longtime employees stopped making eye contact during video meetings. He'd started getting anonymous messages through the company suggestion box. Things like, "Nobody listens here anymore," or "Front desk treats regular people like trash." At first, he chalked it up to disgruntled workers or isolated incidents. But the pattern kept repeating. Customer reviews online had shifted too. Less about service quality, more about how unwelcome people felt the moment they walked in. One comment stuck with him. "Felt like I was bothering them just by existing." That stung, because that wasn't the culture he'd tried to build. He remembered the early days, how he'd personally answer every customer call, how he'd stay late to help a new hire figure out the filing system, how he'd bring coffee to the front desk staff during holiday rushes. Somewhere along the way, as the company grew, he'd stepped back, delegated, trusted the chain of command, and maybe, just maybe, he'd trusted too much. One rainy Tuesday morning, he made a decision. No board meetings, no internal audits, no warning calls to regional managers. He'd go see it for himself, not as the founder, not as the CEO, but as someone nobody would recognize. Someone ordinary, someone who might get ignored. He spent the evening preparing. He dug out old clothes from the back of his closet, jeans with a small tear near the knee, a gray hoodie that had faded from too many washes, scuffed sneakers he hadn't worn in years. He trimmed his beard down to almost nothing, swapped his designer glasses for a pair of plain black frames from a drugstore, and ran a hand through his hair until it looked messy instead of styled. Standing in front of the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Good. The next morning, he drove his oldest car, the one without leather seats or a touchscreen dashboard, to a branch office 2 hours from headquarters. It was a mid-sized location, not too big, not too small, the kind of place where you'd expect things to run smoothly if the system worked. He parked in the public lot across the street, walked in like any other visitor, and took a seat in the waiting area just inside the glass doors. The space was clean, modern even, polished floors, sleek furniture, digital check-in kiosk, but it felt cold. No magazines on the table, no water station, no friendly good morning from anyone passing by. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant clack of keyboards. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in a crisp company polo. She looked professional, composed, eyes fixed on her screen. Every few minutes she'd glance up, smile brightly at someone in a suit and say, "Mr. Thompson, right this way," or "Ms. Chen, they're expecting you." But when a woman in a worn coat came in asking about a service appointment, the receptionist barely looked up. "You'll have to wait," she said flatly, already turning back to her monitor. Daniel watched. He waited. After about 20 minutes, he stood and approached the desk. He kept his voice calm, polite. "Excuse me," he said. "I have an appointment for a job interview at 10. I think I'm a little early, but I wanted to check in." The receptionist didn't look at him right away. She finished typing something, clicked her mouse twice, then slowly raised her eyes. Her expression didn't change, no smile, no nod, just a blank stare. "Name?" she asked, already looking back down. "Daniel Reeves," he said. She tapped a few keys. "Not on my list." He frowned slightly. "I spoke with HR last week. They confirmed the time," she shrugged. "If you're not scheduled, I can't help you." Then, without another word, she turned her attention to her screen again, effectively ending the conversation. He stepped back, surprised. Not angry, just puzzled. He knew for a fact the interview was real. He'd arranged it himself as part of his cover, but maybe HR hadn't updated the front desk. Fair enough. Still, a simple, "Let me check," or "Have a seat, I'll look into it," would have gone a long way. Instead, he'd been dismissed like a telemarketer. He returned to his chair. The minutes ticked by. More people came and went. A delivery guy dropped off a package and was waved through without a word. A man in a wrinkled shirt asked about a billing issue and was told, "Take a number and wait." He sat down near Daniel, sighed heavily, and pulled out a crumpled receipt. They exchanged a glance, two strangers united by the same invisible wall. An hour passed, then another. Daniel watched how the receptionist handled each interaction. With clients who looked important, designer bags, sharp shoes, confident strides, she was warm, efficient, almost eager. But with everyone else, curt, distracted, sometimes outright ignoring them until they spoke twice. At one point, a teenager came in looking for his mom, who worked in accounting. She said I could wait here after school, he mumbled, shifting his backpack nervous. The receptionist didn't look up. Not allowed. Wait outside. But it's raining, the boy said softly. Not my problem. Daniel felt his chest tighten. That wasn't policy, that was choice. A choice to be unkind when no one was watching. Or maybe someone was always watching and no one cared enough to stop it. He pulled out a small notebook, part of his cover as a job seeker, and began jotting down observations. Not just about the receptionist, but the whole atmosphere. How employees rushed through the lobby with their heads down. How no one greeted each other. How the coffee machine in the corner looked untouched, its pot empty and cold. It was like the soul of the place had been vacuumed out, leaving only the shell. By early afternoon, his back ached from the stiff chair, and his stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. He thought about stepping out for a quick bite, but he didn't want to miss anything. So he stayed. At one point, he stood again and walked to the desk. I'm still waiting for my interview, he said gently. It's past 10 now. This time, the receptionist looked at him with something close to annoyance. Look, if HR didn't put you on the schedule, there's nothing I can do. Maybe they canceled and forgot to tell you. I called this morning to confirm, he said. They said everything was set. She sighed loudly as if he were wasting her time. Then call them again. I'm not HR. He nodded, thanked her anyway, and went back to his seat. Politeness, he reminded himself, costs nothing, even when it's not returned. As the afternoon wore on, the waiting area emptied. The delivery guy, the worried customer, even the teenager, all gone. Only Daniel remained, a quiet fixture in the corner. He noticed the receptionist now scrolling through her phone between tasks, laughing at something on the screen. When a senior-looking employee walked by and greeted her by name, she lit up, chatting like old friends. But the moment he turned the corner, her face went blank again. It hit him then. This wasn't just about being busy or overwhelmed. This was a performance. A two-tier system where respect was given only to those who appeared to matter. Everyone else, invisible. He thought about all the people who'd walked through those doors that day. The anxious job seeker, the confused customer, the kid just trying to find his mom. How many of them left feeling small? How many decided never to come back? And how many employees, seeing this every day, started to believe that's how things should be? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the polished floor. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his assistant back at headquarters asking if he was okay. He typed back, fine, learning a lot. That was the truth, he wasn't angry. Not yet, but he was deeply disappointed, because this place, this branch of the company he'd poured his heart into, had lost its way. And no report, no spreadsheet, no polished presentation could have shown him that, like sitting here, unseen and unheard for hours on end. When the clock finally neared 5, the receptionist began shutting down her station. She powered off her monitor, gathered her things, and glanced around the waiting area. Her eyes landed on Daniel. For the first time all day, she looked surprised he was still there. We're closing, she said flatly. I know, he replied, standing slowly. Thanks for your time. She didn't respond. Just slung her bag over her shoulder and walked out without locking the front door behind her. Daniel stood there for a moment in the quiet lobby. The lights were still on, but the energy was gone. He walked to the door, pulled it shut, and heard the soft click of the lock engaging. He didn't head straight to his car. Instead, he sat on a bench outside watching the evening traffic roll by. Rain had started again, light and misty. He pulled his hoodie tighter and thought about what came next. This wasn't just about one rude receptionist. It was about a culture that had drifted far from its roots. And if he didn't step in, not as a boss, but as someone who remembered what it felt like to be on the other side of that desk, then who would? He took a deep breath, stood up, and walked toward his car. Tomorrow he'd be back. But next time, he wouldn't be waiting. The next morning, Daniel returned to the same office, but this time he didn't go in right away. He parked a block down, bought a coffee from a corner cart, and watched the building from across the street. Employees arrived in ones and twos, some laughing, others trudging with their heads down. The receptionist showed up at 8:15 sharp. Same crisp polo, same unreadable expression. She walked past the security guard without a word, swiped her badge, and disappeared inside. Daniel waited another 10 minutes before following. He wore the same clothes as yesterday, hoodie, jeans, old sneakers, but today he carried a worn notebook and a pen tucked behind his ear, like someone serious about finding work. He walked in just as the office was coming alive, hoping the morning rush might reveal something new. The waiting area was already half full. A man in a mechanic's uniform sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, clutching a folder. A woman with tired eyes bounced a fussy toddler on her knee. Near the window, an older gentleman read a newspaper, his hands trembling slightly. Everyone looked like they were holding their breath. Daniel took a seat near the back, close enough to hear but far enough not to draw attention. The receptionist was at her desk, typing fast, answering calls with a practiced, cheerful tone that vanished the second she hung up. When the mechanic stood to ask a question, she held up a finger without looking at him. "One moment," she said, though she didn't look up for nearly 2 full minutes. When she finally did, it was with a sigh. "Yes?" "I was told my appointment was at 9, he said, voice quiet but firm. She tapped her keyboard. "Not seeing it, but I got a confirmation email. Then maybe you're at the wrong location." The man blinked. "This is the only service center within 50 miles, she shrugged. "Not my problem." Daniel watched the man's shoulders slump. He sat back down, opened his folder, and stared at the floor. No anger, just resignation. That was worse somehow, like he'd expected to be brushed off. Over the next hour, Daniel saw the same pattern repeat. People came in with real needs, billing questions, service delays, job inquiries, and were met with indifference or outright dismissal. Yet when a man in a tailored suit arrived, the receptionist was on her feet before he even reached the desk. "Mr. Langston." "Right on time. They're ready for you in Conference B." She even walked him halfway down the hall. It wasn't just about clothing, Daniel realized. It was about perceived value. If you looked like you had power, money, or influence, you were treated like a guest. If you looked like you needed help, you were a nuisance. Around mid-morning, a young woman rushed in, late and flustered. She wore a lanyard with an intern badge and carried a stack of files so tall it wobbled in her arms. As she hurried toward the hallway, her foot caught on the edge of the rug. The files flew everywhere, papers scattering across the polished floor like startled birds. For a second, no one moved. The receptionist glanced over, rolled her eyes, and went back to her screen. The man in the suit was already gone. The woman with the toddler shifted her child to the other hip but didn't stand. The older gentleman kept reading. Daniel didn't think. He just stood and started gathering papers. The intern looked up, startled, then grateful. "Oh, thank you," she stammered, crouching to help. "No problem," he said, handing her a cluster of documents. "Rough morning?" She let out a shaky laugh. "You could say that. I've been running errands for 3 departments since 7. Forgot to eat, and now this." She gestured at the mess. He smiled. "Happens to the best of us." As they worked, she glanced toward the reception desk. She didn't even look up. She muttered more to herself than to him. Daniel kept his voice low. "Seems like she only notices certain people." The intern nodded, then quickly looked away as if she'd said too much. But after a beat, she leaned in slightly. "Between you and me, if you're not on her approved list, you might as well be invisible. She decides who gets seen and who waits forever. Is that allowed?" he asked carefully. She gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Technically, no, but management trusts her. Says she keeps things running smoothly." She stood, clutching the reassembled files. "Anyway, thanks again. Good luck with your interview." He watched her hurry off, shoulders tense, and felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just poor customer service, it was a gatekeeping system, quietly enforced by someone who'd been given too much unchecked authority. He sat back down, but his mind was racing. He needed to understand how deep this went. So he stayed, through lunchtime, when most employees disappeared for an hour and the lobby emptied, through the afternoon lull, when the receptionist scrolled through her phone and occasionally snapped at delivery drivers, through the steady trickle of visitors who left looking more frustrated than when they arrived. At one point, he overheard a call that made his blood run cold. The receptionist was on the phone, voice low but sharp. "No, I told you I didn't let them through." "Why would I? They looked like they couldn't even afford our basic package." A pause, Then yeah, exactly. Waste of time. You want me to keep filtering like this? Good. Because I'm not letting just anyone waltz back there. She hung up and leaned back in her chair, satisfied. Daniel's hands tightened around his notebook, so it wasn't just attitude. It was policy, or at least it was being treated like one. Someone higher up had given her permission, maybe even encouragement to turn people away based on how they looked. He thought about all the customers who'd complained online, all the employees who'd quit without explanation, all the potential hires who'd walked out discouraged. This one desk, this one person, was acting like a bouncer at a club nobody asked to join, but everyone needed to enter. Later in the afternoon, a man in a wheelchair rolled up to the entrance. The automatic door opened, but the threshold had a slight bump. He struggled to get over it, wheels spinning. Daniel started to stand, but before he could move, the intern from earlier appeared out of nowhere. She gently lifted the front of the chair just enough to clear the edge. "Thanks," the man said, relieved. "No problem," she replied, then glanced toward the reception desk. The receptionist hadn't even looked up. The man wheeled himself inside and approached the desk. "I have an appointment with accessibility services," he said clearly. The receptionist finally turned. Her eyes flicked to his chair, then back to her screen. "They're backed up." "You can wait. How long?" he asked. "Don't know. Could be an hour," he nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll wait." He moved to a chair near Daniel. They didn't speak, but after a few minutes the man sighed. "This happens every time. Like they forget people like me exist until we show up." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Sometimes acknowledgement is enough. As the day wore on, Daniel noticed something else. The employees who passed through the lobby avoided eye contact, not just with visitors, but with each other. No hellos, no small talk, no shared smiles. It was as if kindness had become a liability. Like showing too much warmth might mark you as weak or unprofessional. He remembered his own early days, when he'd make a point to learn every employee's name, ask about their kids, remember their favorite coffee order. Back then, the office had felt like a community. Now it felt like a checkpoint. By late afternoon, his legs were stiff, his throat dry. He hadn't brought water, and there was no place to get any. Earlier, he'd asked the receptionist if there was a water fountain or even a cup he could use. "We don't serve that here," she'd said, not even looking up. He'd been so taken aback he hadn't responded. Who says that to a human being? Not "sorry, we're out," or "there's a machine down the hall." Just a flat, almost proud refusal. Now as the sun slanted through the windows, casting long golden bars across the floor, he felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. This wasn't just about one office. If this was happening here, it could be happening elsewhere, and if no one was paying attention, it would keep spreading, like mold in the walls, invisible until the whole structure started to rot. He thought about the intern, the mechanic, the man in the wheelchair, the tired mother, all of them treated like burdens instead of people. And for what? To protect some illusion of efficiency? To make the important clients feel special? It didn't make the business better. It made it smaller, colder, less human. When the receptionist began packing up again, Daniel didn't leave right away. He watched her shut down her computer, zip her bag, and walk out without locking the door, just like yesterday. He waited until the lobby was empty, then stood and walked slowly around the space. He ran a hand over the cold surface of the reception desk, looked at the empty chairs, noticed the dust gathering in the corners. This place had everything: modern tech, clean floors, a prime location. But it was missing the one thing that mattered most: respect. He stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city hummed around him, cars, chatter, life moving forward. He took a deep breath and walked to his car, his mind already turning over what came next. He wouldn't confront her tomorrow. Not yet. He needed to see more. Hear more, understand how far this went. Because if the problem was only at the front desk, it could be fixed with training. But if it went deeper, if it was baked into the way the office operated, then it would take more than a reprimand to heal it. And Daniel was starting to suspect it went very deep indeed. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. He lay in the motel room he'd booked under a fake name, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction from the past 2 days. The way the receptionist's voice changed depending on who stood in front of her. The intern's nervous glance when she'd said too much. The quiet resignation in the eyes of everyone who'd been made to feel small. It wasn't just bad service, it was a system, carefully maintained, quietly enforced. And someone had to be letting it happen. He woke before sunrise, made coffee from the motel's dented pot, and drove back to the office before anyone arrived. This time he parked in the employee lot, slipping in through a side door he'd noticed the day before, one that led to the break room. He wore the same clothes but added a worn backpack, like someone trying to look prepared for a long day of interviews. He didn't plan to sit in the waiting area all day again. He needed to get closer. By 7:30 a.m., the building was stirring. Janitors wheeled carts down the hall. A few early arrivals trickled in, some stopping for coffee in the break room. Daniel lingered near the doorway, pretending to check his phone, listening. 2 women stood by the microwave, heating breakfast burritos. One sighed. "I swear if I have to explain to one more customer why their appointment got lost in the system, I'm going to lose it." "Tell me about it," the other said. "Did you hear about the guy in a wheelchair yesterday? Waited over an hour, and when he finally got back, his rep had left for lunch. No way. And you know who's responsible?" Guess. A pause. Then in a low voice, "The desk?" "Exactly. She never even called back to say he was here." They shook their heads and walked out, voices fading down the hall. Daniel's stomach tightened, so it wasn't just perception. It was happening. And people knew, they just didn't feel safe saying anything. He waited until 8:10, then walked back to the lobby. The receptionist hadn't arrived yet. He took his usual seat and opened his notebook, pretending to review notes. 10 minutes later, she walked in. Same routine, same unreadable face. She didn't notice him at first, but when she did, her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was annoyed he was still around. He didn't approach her. Not yet. Instead, he watched as the morning unfolded. By 9 the lobby was busy again. A delivery person brought in a box and set it on the floor near the desk. "For accounting," he said. The receptionist didn't look up. "Put it over there," she said, jerking her chin toward a corner. "But it's fragile," he said. "Not my problem." The man hesitated, then placed the box carefully and left, shaking his head. Then came the call that changed everything. Around 10:30, the receptionist's phone rang. She answered with her usual bright tone. "Good morning, Bob and Company name. How can I help you?" But within seconds, her posture shifted. She sat up straighter, lowered her voice, glanced around as if checking who might be listening. Daniel pretended to read, but his ears were tuned like radar. "Yes, I understand," she said, voice tight. "No, I haven't let anyone through who didn't meet the profile." A pause. "I know what you said about the look. Trust me, I'm being careful." Another pause. Then, almost smug, "Exactly. Why waste their time and hours on people who clearly can't afford our services?" "Right. I'll keep filtering." She hung up and exhaled, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. Daniel's pen stopped moving, so it wasn't just her judgment. She was taking orders. Someone higher up had told her to judge people by how they looked, to turn away anyone who didn't fit a certain image. That wasn't just poor management. That was a betrayal of everything the company claimed to stand for. He sat very still, heart pounding. He needed to know who was on the other end of that call. But confronting her now would blow his cover. He had to be smarter. A little after 11, the intern from the other day rushed into the lobby again, this time carrying a tray of coffee cups. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. As she passed the reception desk, the receptionist snapped, "Where's mine?" The intern froze. I didn't know you wanted one." "Well, I do. Get me a black coffee. No sugar." The intern nodded quickly and turned toward the hallway. But as she passed Daniel, her foot caught on the same rug edge as before. This time the tray tilted. Coffee sloshed over the sides, burning her hand. She gasped and dropped it. Cups clattered to the floor, brown liquid spreading across the tiles. "Oh no," she whispered, eyes wide with panic. Before she could move, the receptionist stood up. "Are you kidding me? That's the 3rd time this week. Clean it up, now." The intern dropped to her knees, grabbing napkins from the nearby dispenser, hands shaking. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fast. Daniel didn't hesitate. He stood and walked over. "Here," he said, handing her a stack of napkins from his side of the lobby. "Let me help." She looked up, surprised, then grateful. "Thanks," she whispered. They cleaned in silence for a moment. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "She's been like this since the new regional lead took over. Says we need to elevate our client experience, whatever that means." Daniel kept his voice low. "Who's the regional lead?" She glanced toward the receptionist, who was watching them with narrowed eyes. "Office down the hall. Big glass door, always in meetings. Never talks to us unless something's wrong." He nodded slowly. That matched what he'd heard on the call. Someone in charge was pushing this filtering idea, and the receptionist was just the enforcer. After they finished cleaning, the intern stood, wiped her hands on her slacks, and gave him a small, tired smile. "You're not like the others," she said. "How so?" "Most people pretend not to see stuff like this. Or they laugh along. You actually helped." He didn't know what to say, so he just said everyone deserves a little help. She looked like she wanted to say more, but the receptionist called out sharply, "You done wasting time? I'm still waiting on that coffee." The intern flinched, nodded, and hurried off. Daniel returned to his seat, but his mind was racing. He couldn't stay in the lobby forever. He needed to see the other side, the back offices, the meeting rooms, the place where decisions were made. But how? Then it hit him. He still had the fake interview scheduled. Maybe it was time to use it. At noon, he stood and walked to the desk. "I'm following up on my interview," he said calmly. "It was supposed to happen yesterday, but I'm happy to reschedule if needed." The receptionist looked annoyed. "I told you." "I spoke with HR again this morning," he interrupted gently. "They said it's on the calendar for today at 1. With the regional operations lead." Her eyes flickered. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She typed something, frowned, then picked up her phone. "Hey, it's me. There's someone here for a 1 o'clock with redacted. Says HR confirmed it." A pause. Then her face changed. "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll send him back." She hung up and stood. "Follow me." His pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. She led him down a hallway lined with closed doors, past cubicles where employees typed furiously without looking up. At the end of the hall was a glass-walled office. Inside, a man in a sharp blazer sat behind a large desk, scrolling through a tablet. The receptionist knocked once, opened the door, and gestured for Daniel to enter. "You're 1 o'clock," she said, then closed the door behind him without another word. The man looked up. Mid-40s, confident posture, expensive watch. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, right. The job candidate." "Have a seat." Daniel sat, notebook in hand. "Thanks for making time." "Of course. Though I have to say, HR usually sends more polished applicants." His eyes flicked over Daniel's hoodie, his worn jeans. "But let's see what you've got." For the next 20 minutes, Daniel played the part, asking about team culture, growth opportunities, company values. The man gave smooth, rehearsed answers about excellence and selectivity and curating the right client experience. Then Daniel asked, "What does curating the right client experience mean exactly?" The man leaned back. "It means we focus on people who truly value what we offer. Not everyone is a fit, and that's okay. So you turn people away?" "We prioritize," he corrected smoothly. "Efficiency is key. We can't afford to waste resources on dead-end inquiries." Daniel's stomach turned. This was it. The source. The man wasn't just allowing the behavior, he was directing it. He asked a few more questions, took notes, thanked the man, and left. As he walked back through the lobby, the receptionist watched him with suspicion. He gave her a polite nod and stepped outside. He didn't go to his car. He walked around the block, heart pounding, mind racing. This wasn't just one bad apple. It was a rot that started at the top. And if this regional lead was doing it here, who else was doing it in other offices? But then he thought of the intern, the janitor who'd smiled at him that morning, the delivery guy who'd been treated like dirt. They weren't part of this. They were trapped in it. He couldn't fix everything today, but he could start. That evening, instead of returning to the motel, he drove to a quiet diner a few miles away. He ordered coffee and sat in a booth by the window. He pulled out his notebook and began writing. Not just observations, but names, patterns, quotes. He needed to remember every detail, because tomorrow he wouldn't be coming back as a job seeker. He'd be coming back as himself. And this time, no one would be able to look away. The morning sun was sharp and clear as Daniel pulled into the employee parking lot. This time in his usual car, wearing a dark suit, polished shoes, and the quiet certainty of someone who no longer needed to hide. He hadn't slept much, but he didn't feel tired. There was a kind of calm focus in him now, The kind that comes after you've seen something broken and decided you're going to fix it, no matter how hard it gets. He walked through the front doors just after 8. The lobby was quiet, still filling up. The receptionist was at her desk typing, coffee steaming beside her. She didn't look up as he entered. Why would she? To her, he was just another person in a suit, probably another vendor or client. She'd perfected the art of reading people at a glance, and she'd already slotted him into the important category without even seeing his face. He stopped a few feet from her desk and waited. When she finally glanced up, her smile was automatic, bright, professional, practiced. "Good morning. How can I—" Then she saw his eyes, her breath caught. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. The color drained from her face. She knew him, not from a photo or a company newsletter. She knew him from 2 days of ignoring him, dismissing him, treating him like he didn't matter, and now he was standing in front of her, dressed like the man who owned the building, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Disappointment, maybe, but not anger. "Not yet. Good morning," Daniel said, voice calm. "I'd like to go to the conference room. The team should be gathering for the quarterly review." She stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Sir, yes, of course." "Right this way." Her voice cracked on the last word. He didn't move. "Actually," he said gently, "I'd like you to come with me." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes. You've been here longer than most. I think your perspective will be valuable." She swallowed hard, nodded, and grabbed a notepad like it might shield her. She led him down the same hallway he'd walked 2 days before, but this time employees noticed. Doors opened. Heads turned. Whispers followed them like wind through dry leaves. The conference room was already half full. Managers, team leads, the regional operations lead from the glass office, all seated around the long table, laptops open, coffee cups in hand. They looked up as Daniel entered and the room went still. "Good morning," he said, walking to the head of the table. He didn't sit. "Before we begin the review, I'd like to share something I experienced this week." He turned to the receptionist who stood near the door, gripping her notepad like a lifeline. "Would you mind joining us at the table?" She hesitated, then walked slowly to an empty chair, eyes down. Daniel took a breath. "On Monday, I came to this office as a visitor. No title, no warning. Just a man in old clothes waiting for an interview that had been scheduled by HR. I sat in your lobby for over 5 hours. During that time, I watched how people were treated when they walked through that door." He paused. The silence was thick enough to cut. "I saw a mechanic told his appointment didn't exist, even though he had confirmation. I saw a young intern drop a stack of files and get mocked for it. I saw a man in a wheelchair wait over an hour while his appointment walked out for lunch. And I saw someone ask for a glass of water and be told, 'Now, we don't serve that here.'" A few people shifted in their seats. The regional lead cleared his throat but said nothing. "I also overheard a phone call," Daniel continued, voice steady, "where someone said they were filtering out people who clearly can't afford our services based on how they looked. That wasn't a rogue employee making bad choices. That was policy, or at least it was being treated like one." All eyes turned to the regional lead. He sat rigid, face pale. Daniel looked at the receptionist. "You were following instructions, weren't you?" She nodded, barely moving. "He told me to keep things efficient, to only send back people who looked like they belonged." "And who decides who belongs?" Daniel asked, not accusingly, just sadly. No one answered. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below. A delivery van pulled up. A woman with a stroller waited at the crosswalk. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. People his company was supposed to serve. "This business wasn't built on exclusivity," he said, turning back. "It was built on respect, on showing up for people when they needed us, whether they wore a suit or work boots, whether they had a lot or a little. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that." He sat down finally, not at the head of the table, but in the middle, next to the receptionist. "I'm not here to fire anyone today. I'm here to understand how this happened and how we fix it." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then the receptionist spoke, voice trembling. "I thought I was doing the right thing." He said it was what you wanted, what the company needed to stay competitive. Daniel looked at her. "Did it feel right?" She shook her head, tears welling. "No, but I didn't think I had a choice." "You always have a choice," he said softly, "even when it's hard." Then he turned to the regional lead. "You were hired to grow this office, not shrink its heart." Did you really believe turning people away based on their appearance was the way to do that? The man stared at his hands. I thought I was protecting the brand, keeping standards high. Standards aren't about how someone dresses, Daniel said. They're about how we treat them. And we failed. He stood again. Here's what's going to happen. Starting today, every employee, starting with leadership, will spend one full day working in a role outside their department. The regional lead will sit at the front desk for a week. Managers will handle customer calls. I'll be here too, doing whatever needs doing. A murmur went through the room. And we're rewriting our front desk protocol, he continued. No more filtering, no more assumptions. If someone walks in, they get seen. They get heard. They get treated like a human being, because that's what they are. He looked around the table. This isn't punishment. It's a reset. Because if we lose sight of why we started this company, then all the profits in the world won't mean a thing. The meeting that followed was unlike any quarterly review they'd ever had. Instead of slides and spreadsheets, they talked, really talked. About customer complaints they'd ignored. About employees who'd quit because they felt ashamed of how the office treated people. About the fear of speaking up. The intern from earlier was invited in halfway through. At first she stood by the door, nervous. But when Daniel asked her what she'd changed, she took a deep breath and said, "Stop making people feel like they're bothering us just by showing up." That simple sentence hung in the air like a bell. By noon, a plan was forming, not top-down but built together. New training focused on empathy, not efficiency. A suggestion box that actually got read. By Daniel himself. A monthly listening day where leaders would sit in the lobby and talk to whoever came in. As the meeting ended, the receptionist lingered. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course, and why didn't you fire me?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've been where you are. Early on I made choices I wasn't proud of because I thought that's what success looked like. It took someone giving me a second chance to realize I was wrong. Everyone deserves that," she nodded, tears spilling over. "I'll do better. I know you will," he said. "And I'll be here to help." He walked out of the conference room and into the lobby. It looked the same. Polished floors, sleek furniture, humming lights, but it already felt different. Lighter, somehow. He didn't go back to headquarters that day. He stayed. He sat at the front desk for an hour, greeting everyone who came in. He brought coffee to the intern. He apologized to the mechanic who'd come back for his rescheduled appointment. And when a woman walked in, tired and unsure, asking about a billing issue, he stood up, smiled, and said, "Let's figure this out together." For the first time in a long time, the lobby didn't feel like a checkpoint, it felt like a beginning. 3 months later, the same office felt like a different place. Not because the furniture had changed, though the stiff waiting chairs had been swapped for softer ones, and a small water station now stood near the entrance, but because of the way people moved through the space. There was a rhythm to it now, a quiet hum of connection instead of silence. People greeted each other in the hallway. The front desk wasn't a barrier anymore, it was a starting point. Daniel hadn't just visited once and left. He'd come back every week, sometimes for a day, sometimes just an hour. He'd worked the reception desk himself, answered customer calls, even helped restock the supply closet. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he needed to remember, and to remind everyone else that leadership isn't about being above the work. It's about being part of it. The receptionist she'd asked to be called by her real name now, not just the front desk, had changed too. Not overnight and not perfectly. There were still moments when old habits flickered, when she'd glance at someone's clothes before speaking. But now she caught herself, and when she did, she'd take a breath, smile, and say, "How can I help you?" Like she meant it. She'd even started training new hires, not just on the software or the schedule, but on something harder to teach, how to see people. It's not about whether they look like a client, she'd tell them. It's about treating everyone like they matter, because they do. One rainy Thursday morning, Daniel walked in unannounced again. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, no suit, no tie. He wanted to see what things were like when no one was expecting him. The lobby was busy but calm. A young couple filled out forms near the window. An older man chatted with the receptionist while he waited for his appointment. The intern, now a full-time team member, walked by with a stack of files, but this time she moved with confidence, not fear. Daniel took a seat near the back. just like he had that first day. No one noticed him at first. He watched as a delivery driver came in, soaked from the rain. Instead of being waved to a corner, the receptionist handed him a towel from a drawer and said, "Rough day out there. Thanks for getting this to us." The man blinked, then smiled. "Appreciate that." Later, a woman with a tired face and a toddler on her hip approached the desk. "I think I'm early," she said softly. "No worries," the receptionist replied. "Have a seat. We've got water and there are some toys over there if your little one gets restless." The woman's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you, that's really kind." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. Around mid-morning, the regional lead, the same man who'd once talked about filtering people, walked into the lobby. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a company polo like the rest of the staff and carried a clipboard. He nodded to the receptionist, then sat down at a small table near the entrance. For the next 2 hours, he greeted every visitor, asked how their experience was going, and took notes. He wasn't performing. He was listening. At lunch, Daniel joined him. "How's it going?" he asked, sitting across the table. The man looked up, surprised but not defensive. "Harder than I thought," he admitted. "You don't realize how much you miss when you're always behind a closed door." "Yeah," Daniel said. "I forgot that too." They ate in silence for a moment. Then the man added, "I apologized to the mechanic. The one I told you didn't have an appointment. And?" He accepted. Said he'd give us another chance. He paused. "I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm going to try." "That's all any of us can do," Daniel said. Over the next few weeks, changes spread beyond that one office. Daniel rolled out the listening days company-wide. Every branch now had a rotating schedule where managers spent time in customer-facing roles. HR rewrote the onboarding program to emphasize dignity over speed, and the suggestion box, it wasn't just read, it was responded to. Every single note got a reply, signed by a real person. Customer reviews started shifting. Not just higher ratings, but different words. Felt welcome. Actually listened to me. Like they cared. Employees began staying longer. Turnover dropped by nearly 40% in 6 months. Even the janitorial staff said people were friendlier, more respectful. But the real test came one afternoon when a teenager walked in. The same one who'd been told to wait outside in the rain months before. This time he wore a school blazer and carried a folder labeled internship application. The receptionist recognized him right away. She didn't say a word about the past. She just smiled and said, "Welcome back. Your mom's in accounting, right? She mentioned you might stop by." He nodded, surprised. "Yeah, she's in the back." "Go on through, I'll let her know you're here." He hesitated. "Thanks." As he walked down the hall, Daniel, who'd been observing from a nearby chair, stood and approached the desk. "You remembered him," he said quietly. She looked up. "Of course I did. Everyone who walks through that door leaves a mark." Even if I didn't see it at first, he nodded. That was the heart of it. Not perfection, not never making mistakes, but learning to see. Later that week, Daniel held a small gathering in the same conference room where everything had changed. No executives. No presentations. Just the people who'd been there through the shift, the receptionist, the intern, the regional lead. A few customer service reps, even the mechanic, who'd become a regular client and now referred others. They sat in a circle, not around a table. No hierarchy, just humans. "I didn't come here to fix a broken office," Daniel said. "I came because I was afraid we'd lost something we couldn't get back. But you showed me it was still there, just buried under habits and fear." The intern spoke up. "I used to think speaking up would get me fired. Now I feel like my voice matters." The regional lead added, "I thought success meant control. Turns out it means connection." And the receptionist, after a long pause, said, "I used to think my job was to keep people out. Now I know it's to let them in." Daniel didn't say much after that. He just listened. Because that's what real leadership is, sometimes. It's just being quiet enough to hear what needs to be said. As the sun set that evening, he walked out of the building one last time, not as a visitor, not as a boss, but as someone who belonged. The city buzzed around him, ordinary and alive. He thought about all the people who'd walked through those doors over the months. The worried, the hopeful, the frustrated, the determined. Each one had a story. Each one deserved to be met with kindness. He got into his car, but before driving off, he looked back at the building. Through the glass doors, he saw the receptionist helping an elderly woman find her way to the elevator. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't annoyed. She was just there, present, human. And in that moment, Daniel knew the work wasn't done. It never really is. But it was headed in the right direction. Not because of policies or programs, but because people had chosen every day to do better. He started the engine, pulled into traffic, and drove home, not with a sense of victory, but with quiet hope. Because the best companies aren't built on profits or prestige. They're built on the simple, stubborn belief that everyone who walks through the door deserves to be seen. And sometimes, all it takes is one person sitting in a waiting room long enough to remember that.